Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. For those of you that are new to this podcast is all about getting you outdoors more comfortably and more confidently so that you can start living a life full of adventure. Now today we're doing one of your guys' favorite styles of podcasts. Those are product deep dives. There's a ton of information which we cover in here. And it's all going to be about a new product that we just released called the Nebo Windbreaker. So before you tune out, because you've probably not had a whole lot of experience with windbreakers, I highly encourage you to listen to this. You will learn a lot about how to use a windbreaker, how versatile it is, how it's one of the most versatile pieces you can put in your backpack. I mean, next to base layers, it's incredibly versatile. And how this is probably a piece, or just a windbreaker in general, if you don't choose the Nebo, it's probably a piece that you didn't know you needed, but you really do. There's so much benefit to a windbreaker, and we really dive into stories and examples and how to use a windbreaker more efficiently, and all that in this episode. So in this episode, I will have Brigham, our lead designer here at Outdoor Vitals, on. We will dive into all of the juicy details of creating the product, what we were hoping to accomplish with the product, and just in general, how we choose to use the product. So I think you guys are going to greatly enjoy this. Again, this is going to be about the Nebo Windbreaker. And for those of you that think windbreakers are just for runners or, for the other guys that maybe understand them, it's time for you to learn what a windbreaker does and start putting it to use so that you can be more comfortable and more confident in the backcountry. And, in turn, the reason that matters to us is when you're comfortable and you're confident in your abilities and in your gear in the backcountry, you get out more, which is our whole purpose here at Outdoor Vitals, is to connect people to the vital outdoors. So let's jump right in. We'll roll this interview where me and Brigham talk about the Nebo Windbreaker. All right, Brigham, let's go ahead and dive in and begin the deep dive of the Nebo Windbreaker. This is a piece that has become a bit of a fan favorite, I feel like, in your heart. Especially, I've enjoyed the crap out of it the last year or so, longer than that, though, since we've been testing it. And but it's kind of a niche piece that I feel like a lot of listeners probably aren't actively using a windbreaker, or maybe don't have much experience with a windbreaker. But the thing is, it's an easy piece to fall in love with the more you understand layering and the more you get comfortable with your gear. And so let's start all of this before we even get into the details of what the heck the Nebo Windbreaker is. I feel like we need to give some baseline on what is the purpose of a windbreaker, why is it valuable in a layering system, or when is it valuable? And then we can talk about why we made ours the way that we did and what makes it unique and different. So yeah, let's start off right there. Why is a windbreaker important for anyone listening right now, and why could it become one of their favorite pieces?
Well, I think the underestimated or the underrated thief of basically the backcountry is wind. And I say thief because it robs our heat very efficiently from our body. So there's different types of heat loss. Convective heat loss is when air moves across our body and it draws heat away from our body. And it's just, wind is a very efficient and effective means of doing that because you can't see it. So it's hard to always be conscious of its presence. And it doesn't matter if it's warm, cool, or sub-freezing, it always is going to be acting in a way that takes heat away from our body. So it can kind of sneak up on people in terms of when they start to feel the sensation of having lost too much heat. At that point, generally, you've lost too much, and your body is going to have to work a little bit harder to get that heat back. So, yeah.
I think one of the best examples of that listeners can relate to is the difference of being inside of your tent and outside of your tent. I feel like people always talk about, okay, inside the tent it was 5 degrees warmer or something like that, which, can be true depending on, body heat that you're putting off and some of those factors, right? But what I think I'm more referring to is that instant relief of climbing inside of your tent when that wind stops stealing all your heat away from you. It's massive. I mean, it is, especially as you get into colder and colder situations. So when you're out like winter backpacking and that wind is blowing and it's blowing a 10-degree temperature wind onto your body, and then you get inside the tent, it's almost like your body's working really hard to keep itself warm. And then you get into the tent and all of a sudden it's like your body heat just starts shooting up like really fast. And it's really noticeable, but it's noticeable summer, winter, fall, whenever. But just imagine when you're in windy conditions and you're getting cold and it's nighttime and you climb into that tent and it blocks the wind, that sense of massive relief and warmth that comes from that. That's the best, in my opinion, probably way to describe just how much of an effect the wind is having on you. So again, to bring it back to this base layer here, or this windbreaker here, that's this is one tool that can help combat that.
Yeah. Unless the ambient temperature is warmer than, basically 99 degrees, convective heat loss will always occur if the air is moving. It will always occur. Now, the larger the difference between body temperature and ambient temperature, the more significant that or noticeable that effect will be when wind is introduced. So if it's 80 degrees and windy, we're not going to feel nearly as rapid of cooling or heat loss as we would if it's 10 degrees and the same amount of wind. And then of course, if we're active or we've been moving, through snow or just on the trail with no snow, but we've been physical enough to perspire or sweat a little bit, then it's even more noticeable. So
it is pretty wild sometimes, and maybe this is just a me problem, but I can be hiking in freezing temperatures and feel cold, and I swear I can still put off sweat.
Yep.
It's like, why doesn't the body connect the dots here sometimes? Not a lot, but like it is wild because it's very easy to generate, sweat, even in times when it's extremely cold. And then once you've got moisture and wind, then it just multiplies the effect on the body at an extremely fast rate.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Is there any other aspects of just like why the heck should people care about a windbreaker? And
I just like wind is kind of underrated. The use or the blocking of wind is underrated in terms of clothing and the clothing we choose to take on a backpacking trip. But I think people have just so much to benefit by, applying a windbreaker, because you can get so much benefit for so little weight in any season, in any condition of the year, essentially. There's kind of always somebody that has a windbreaker will always get a boost in warmth just by putting it on. So, and that again is, it applies to all seasons. So even in the summertime, it's a really good piece to have in your kit because you can be more efficient in your travel, or meaning it's just enough boost in warmth versus putting on something that is probably way more than is needed. And a result of that means that you just get just the right amount of boost in heat so that you can keep going for a longer period of time. A good example of this is like backpacking in the mountains in July. Like that's as warm as it gets. Let's say like even up in the high country, right? But oftentimes there's an edge in the morning. It's brisk.
There's more wind in the morning.
There's more wind in the morning, especially on more exposed ridges and in the mountains. And And so there's a sensation of cold. And people have a tendency to immediately kind of over-insulate. They get up and they feel cold, or, they want to feel immediate relief or immediate comfort. So they'll put on like a lofted piece, like a puffy or something. And while they're just sitting eating breakfast, that will feel comfortable. Oftentimes what people do is they'll eat breakfast with their puffy on, and then they'll pack up their camp, and then they'll hit the trail with the puffy still on. And then in 10 minutes, they're feeling way too warm, and they're already starting to perspire more than is necessary. And then in 10 minutes, they either stop to take the puffy off, or what a lot of people do is they procrastinate. They procrastinate taking off because they realize they just left and they don't want to stop again. So then they hike for an hour in this puffy, a down or a synthetic puffy jacket basically, and they get uncomfortable. And now they're hiking for an hour uncomfortable and sweating, which means they're going to need to, consume more water, filter more water. It just makes them much less efficient for the day's travel or whatever the adventure is. Where if you were to just start the hike with a windbreaker in the morning, you can hike for hours with that thing on, and regulate your heat at a much better rate than if you were to put on anything warmer than a windbreaker. Because essentially that's probably all you need to even get that immediate feel of comfort, because you're just going to block the wind. And that wind being stopped combined with our own physical activity is going to put us in a really like near optimal condition to start putting on some miles without having to stop and change layers again.
Yeah, not to mention the moisture that you've now introduced into your puffy. So when you pull it out later, you could be getting degradation of loft, or you could, just be putting on a slightly damp layer. I mean, it doesn't take much moisture to then become problematic later on. And I think back even to hiking the Uinta Highline Trail this last year, and there was a morning in particular that like there's that saying of be bold, start cold or something like that. Like it's a catchy way to be like, hey, don't put your puffy on when you start hiking in the mornings. So I'm always that guy. Like I'm like, nope, I'm just going to try my best to start really cold sometimes. But there's times, especially in some of that high country, where even like this altitude hoodie I'm wearing right now, like it's still cold at the top of the mountain, even exerting all of this energy because the wind is blowing at such a rate and it's such a cold temperature. But any insulation, and then I'm just sweating inside of that insulation. And so, it's a great piece to take advantage for that, because I could have hiked for the first couple hours, probably 3 hours that day in that piece. Yeah. I mean, way more comfortable altogether. So we'll get into some more strategies on that, but. So just to sum up, though, this is the other applications that you might be considering is just really any high level of activity where blocking the wind could be important for comfort, for retaining heat loss, for not losing too much heat. So I use a tremendous amount trail running. It's a fantastic piece for trail running. It's a fantastic piece for any active pursuits in winter seasons even, so cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, anything like that. But you don't just have to think in the winter, right? So it's a fantastic piece for hiking. It's a fantastic piece for any active pursuit. I think me personally, I had a bit of I don't know if I'd say like a belief that people that use windbreakers were typically runners. Mm-hmm. Like I think they probably use them almost more than anyone else, but I think that's not correct. Like anyone who's, exerting any level of activity can benefit from a windbreaker. And at the weight category that it is, it's more of like a why not, use it in your layering system than a why you shouldn't type of a scenario. So, massive wide variety of uses, which we'll get into in more depth as well. But, any other, maybe to take it one step back further before we go any further here is just, what is a windbreaker's core purpose? Like for those that might not know, like the difference between a windbreaker and a rain jacket. So let's get into exactly what that is. So
core purposes, as you might suspect by the name, is to block the wind. But the reason behind blocking the wind is to preserve our core body temperature by preventing or reducing or slowing down convective heat loss, slowing down the rate at which air or wind takes heat away from our body. So I mean that's really the core purpose.
So what kind of fabric is used? Yeah.
So when you mentioned rain jacket, I think that's another reason why windbreakers are so underutilized and underrepresented and underappreciated is people, I'll say, make the mistake of thinking that they're just going to be efficient in terms of weight by just using their rain jacket for a windbreaker. A rain jacket is so much less breathable than a windbreaker that it's I would say not just inappropriate, it's kind of setting oneself up for failure to try to use a rain jacket actively, like on the move, in terms of just to block the wind. A rain jacket is going to be at least 2 layers. It's going to have a face fabric and a waterproof membrane. And that membrane, it has to be very, 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 like almost air impermeable in order to do its job of blocking water. So the application of a rain jacket in lieu or in the place of a windbreaker is really energy inefficient and like water inefficient, because a person will get to the point where they're sweating like exponentially faster in a rain jacket than they would in a windbreaker. The rain jacket just does not have the breathability. And then there's the, generally a rain jacket's going to be heavier. Even the lightest rain jackets that might be similar in weight are just so unbreathable and very fragile at that point that they have, there's just such a narrow use case for a rain jacket versus a windbreaker. I don't know.
I mean, to sum that up, I think it does. But to just even sum that up a little bit, another step, it's that a windbreaker fabric, in our opinion, should be breathable, should allow for moisture to escape, and a rain jacket simply doesn't, right? Like typically 90+% of rain jackets out there don't allow for any air movement. Vapor movement, meaning moisture movement, yes, but not air movement.
Yeah.
And so they're not air permeable, and moisture, it takes a lot of heat and time to transfer moisture out of the jacket as well. So even like our Tusher rain jacket with pit zips and where you can vent it and stuff, it's not going to work as a great windbreaker any better per se than like a puffy would, because a puffy, you're going to overheat in a puffy, you're going to overheat in that piece, and you're going to start to get clammy on the inside. And so like if you were sitting stationary, then it might be an argument. But if you plan on using it while moving at all, then a windbreaker has a place in your pack because it does a completely different job. And that's just one part of it, right? There's so much more to this that we'll unpack. But I mean, personally, it can sometimes become like a battle internally where you're like, okay, well, maybe I just take the rain jacket this time or that. I mean, the one benefit of, say, using a rain jacket over an insulated piece, if you were to start that way, is that the rain jacket will dry out. It will get wet, 100%, like from sweating and stuff, but at least it'll dry out easier than a lofted insulation. But the windbreaker is the next level of that, where you likely won't even get wet to begin with from perspiration, and it'll be actively drying and maintaining temperature at the right level to begin with. So the material used in a windbreaker is not, it is air permeable. It is not a waterproof membrane. And so when you're thinking of this, you're thinking of, for those of you that are watching, something similar to like what Brigham's wearing on the outside right now. It's a nylon or a polyester shell, and it's not a membraned piece. So
that was a good point. And if later on we talk about materials, and we can, there's a couple other good points to make there. But
okay,
we can.
All right, I think we set the groundwork here pretty well. So let's jump into some of the specs on this piece, and then we're going to share some stories and use cases that just stand out to us of when and why we've used these pieces and how they really function. So the Nebo Windbreaker, it is a 20 denier ripstop nylon. It is DWR treated, but there are no other coatings on the fabric, which really aid in its breathability.
Well, there is a coating on there, but it's specifically engineered to this fabric. So there is a DWR treatment on top of a specific coating that makes the fabric wind resistant and breathable at the same time. There's other coatings out there that will definitely block wind, but they won't breathe at all. Like much less than this fabric. So there is a coating on there. It's a proprietary coating that we're not going to disclose, but there is a coating that is specific to increasing the wind resistance, the durability, while allowing very, very good breathability.
So in terms of, that's a really good point. In terms of analyzing, let's say, other people's jackets, what are they typically putting on a windbreaker to accomplish this? Or
so, yeah, going about a windbreaker fabric, there's different ways of doing it. There are actually windbreaker jackets out there that are multi-layer. So they'll use a face fabric and a wind membrane. And essentially all that is the same as like a waterproof membrane, but it's much more open microscopically and does allow air to move through it. The other way of making a windbreaker or wind resistant or windproof fabric is by applying a very thick coating. Think of like what we would do with like a tent fabric, like whether that's a sil nylon or a sil PU, where it's siliconized and then coated, essentially painting on a polyurethane coating that is visible, that will not allow any vapor transfer or air permeability. So that is an option in terms of a windbreaker, essentially using tent fabric and making a jacket out of that. And then when it comes to other types of fabrics, I'll basically exclude like knit fabrics. Like a knit fabric is much too open fabric structure to really block any meaningful wind. So in woven fabrics, how you adjust the wind resistance and the breathability, is just by how tightly woven the fabric itself is. And then there's other finish treatments that can be done to, equally woven fabrics, especially if you're talking like a polyester or a nylon. There's processes where they can then take that finished fabric and then put it through, just kind of think of it as like two rollers on top of each other with heat. And then they'll roll that through, so it's kind of applying heat to the fabric and smashing it at the same time. And essentially that's kind of like taking,
like soldering it almost.
It's almost like for the meat cookers out there, it's almost like searing a steak, right? So you put that steak onto a really high heat grill, and that sears almost a hard surface on the outside of a steak, and that keeps the juices in the meat. I don't know if that's perfect apples to apples, but it's kind of the same idea is putting heat and pressure on the outside surface that flattens the fiber structures that are woven together that create a very air impermeable surface. So those are
that treatment in and of itself that Brigham's talking about here. It can be so effective that it can even block down from leaking out of material.
That's the most common and efficient way of making downproof fabric. So like sleeping bags, puffy jackets, that's the most commonly used method or process to make a downproof fabric, is by that process. So that's some of the ways that materials are made to block the wind, and then it just comes down to selecting from those different types.
Yeah. And I mean, since we're talking about it, look, I mean, let's be honest, a windbreaker is basically all fabric. Like that's what it boils down to.
I mean, it really is.
Like 80% of what makes it what it is. And so when we first got started in this, you essentially ordered 2 highly rated windbreakers, and we went out on a trip, and you handed me one and said, all right, tell me what you think of this on this trip. And so we were hiking in the snow, and the one that I had definitely felt, I don't know for sure, but it felt like it had a siliconized coating on it. The thing was so slippery. With the backpack, it would come up my back and slide up my back. And then the one you were using, I mean, that thing looked so unbreathable. Just looked like a big trash bag on you. We couldn't stop laughing about it, but just did not look breathable at all, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of learned some things from that, and so what was really neat about where we've got to now with what we put in the Nebo was this fabric is incredibly unique. It's so unique and so hard to weave it as the way that they're doing, which I would maybe describe it as like the tolerances are so tight and the weaving is so tight that our partners that are making this fabric for us, they're making it in Japan. They can't even duplicate their own results at their own fabric mill that's not this one. So it's their highest level weavers essentially, and highest oldest fabric mill that's able to create this, and its tight tolerances and ability to do what it does. And what came from this was a piece that blocks the wind, is super breathable still, which sounds counterintuitive. I don't know how better to say that.
Well, I mean, what it comes down to is, if we think about some of those methods that I talked about, those all address certain priorities, right? But in terms of overall objective of the windbreaker is we wanted a windbreaker that we can move in for extended periods of time. That narrows down, or that almost self-identifies certain priorities or requirements of fabric type or of fabric construction type, because we've identified it's got to block wind, but we didn't say it has to block all wind. It has to breathe. Now those two go together. Like if it's going to breathe, then it has to not block 100% of wind. We also want it to be as lightweight as possible while meeting the durability requirements that we have, which means we need to be able to hike in this thing all day. So that now eliminates like the lightest weight fabrics out there. So we're kind of shaping this balance of all these priorities. And for an active windbreaker, it absolutely has to breathe. And I don't mean breathe in terms of like a waterproof breathable membrane. And I also don't mean breathe in terms of some of the, let's just say, branded wind membranes out there. We need to breathe more than that. And we need to weigh less than those laminate wind fabrics out there. And, in testing, one of the things we quickly identified is we don't like hiking with plastic bags on our bodies. We don't like hiking with really slippery fabrics that don't interface well with other layers in our system or other pieces of gear that we're using, like, say, a backpack. So all of those factors, there's all these variables that kind of narrow down like what we actually have to get in this fabric. And then that was like you were describing with this fabric, and it was just so great that we ended up where we did. And it just so happens that this fabric can only be made in one mill in Japan, like Tayson said, because the tolerances of the process of achieving what we need in this fabric, they're so tight that like you said, they can't even essentially just take the same recipe or set of instructions and just transfer it over to another mill of their own company, because it'll be out of tolerance.
They've tried
for a few yards.
Multiple.
It might meet the spec, but for a few yards of the roll, it might not. And that's that combination of the yarn manufacturing, the weaving process, and the application of that coating that I was talking about. All of those three things are so tightly dialed in that they can't or won't or both. They won't and can't make it anywhere else. And so that's kind of the fabric. That's the 20D ripstop nylon. That sounds very basic, but it's really fun to kind of talk about the details behind it because we had some very negative experiences with some of those other fabric types, and some of the feedback I've gotten from people that have tested this for us is an immediate feeling of a positive reaction as soon as the piece is put on. It doesn't feel sticky, clammy. It feels breathable. It has a great feel. Anyway,
I think so. Two points there. One, we had an interesting conversation with the fabric mill, and regarding this, but regarding other things we're doing here at Outdoor Vitals, where they're saying, we're essentially getting into this realm of only really specialty manufacturers like us essentially are using this level of fabric because of costing. At a mass scale, at a typical retail brand, even the highest end retail brands, this stuff can start to get overly costly even for them. And so it's really interesting because this is a very, very premium fabric that can't really be replicated and is costly. But, thankfully, again, at Outdoor Vitals, we do things different. We sell direct, and it allows us to bring stuff like this to market. The other thing, though, is, going back to some of those other jackets that we tested, keep in mind, these are highly rated jackets we know people are using, rating high. To me, I mean, one of the biggest takeaways from that trip in particular was why have a windbreaker if it traps moisture? Like I may as well just wear any insulation if it's just going to trap moisture anyways, right? Like, so I was getting a lot of moisture trapping inside the pieces. I know you were as well. And so that was a massive negative. Not only were they slippery and things like that, but that moisture trapping. And so really, coming back to where we started with this, this 20 denier ripstop nylon and the treatments that are on it create this amazing dynamic of both blocking the wind, reducing that convective heat loss, and but still being able to allow moisture to escape and allow excessive heat to escape at a rate that works really well in the field. So again, boiling it back to what we judge everything off of is in-field performance, and the usability of this piece is exponentially higher due to what we have created with it. So that's the fabric. I mean, and it's an amazing fabric, and really what brings this whole piece together. Other details, though, on this are just going to be that the size large comes in at 4.4 ounces. So super light. We'll say a medium, which is what most of the weights that you'll read on a website, like if you're just to browse someone's website and they have a weight listed for a jacket, is typically a medium. So, a medium may be closer to that 4 ounce mark.
It's about 4.
About 4 even. So for 4 ounces, you're adding a piece that you may be able to wear sometimes all day or for massive amounts of the day. It's going to add warmth to different pieces, which again, I want to maybe circle back to that just a little bit later on the massive range of use of a windbreaker if you're using it the way we've been using it, in the way that we feel like is right. So we're looking at about a 4 ounce piece for the garment. As far as sizing, we will release this in a small through a 3XL. It is still our typical Outdoor Vitals cut, which is a more athletic cut. Speaking of that, Brigham, so we typically will size pieces up. Like let's say the Nova Pro, obviously the cut of that is bigger than an altitude hoodie because it's meant to be worn over the top of other layers. Mm-hmm. What's our I guess answer, or how do we view this as far as what layers may be going underneath it?
So and actually this is a very deliberate process in terms of the fit of this piece specifically because it is a piece that inherently should and will be worn in the wind. When you're walking with wind, you are either encountering resistance or being pushed one way or the other. So in terms of actual movement efficiency, how a piece like a jacket or a shirt, how it fits is a critical element to the performance of that piece in terms of energy expenditure and efficiency over miles on a trail. So that was specifically accounted for in this piece because this is a layering piece. It has to allow for layers underneath it, but also layers over top of it. But when used at the minimal number of layers, i.e. over a base layer like you're wearing, if someone is putting on the Nebo Windbreaker over top of that and that's it, if there's too much room for layering, they're going to be walking with a wind sail, and now they're less efficient. It's going to have more energy requirement on their physical effort, and so
it also allows for air to funnel up underneath it.
Yep. So then you get billowing, you get wind resistance and drag, and so the fit is very deliberately done here to just be as efficient as possible with the ability to layer underneath it, but also have it be standalone as an outer layer piece, but also allow layering over top of it without just a ton of bunching up and discomfort. You know, if it's so roomy, you know, to allow for 7 layers underneath, if you're just wearing it over top of a base layer and then you put a jacket or something over top of it, it's going to be really uncomfortable. You're going to have tons of excess fabric bunching up and creating hot spots. So it is more on the athletic side of fit, but it does allow for layering over top of multiple layers, including if you were to put it over, like, say, a Vario jacket or a Ventus hoodie. It will totally accommodate that.
So you could potentially put it directly on a base layer. You could put it over a Vario jacket, but you might be hitting a limit, or I think you would especially start to degrade some of the loft in, say, putting it over the top of like a Nova or Nova Pro.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because that would almost be self-defeating, or that would be an inefficient use of the Windbreaker, especially with our Nova line of jackets, because they're just as wind resistant, probably more wind resistant than the Windbreaker. It makes no sense to put a Windbreaker over top of a Nova Pro, but it totally makes sense to put a puffy jacket over top of a Windbreaker. The closer that Windbreaker is to the body, the quicker it's going to slow down heat loss and air movement away from the body. So that's an interesting thing that people don't really keep in mind a lot, is that with a Windbreaker, you're not going to put it on underneath your base layer, or maybe even like you might not even put it on under like a mid layer, but you totally could. Like if you were hiking in the morning with a base layer and a mid layer and a Windbreaker, if you stop for lunch and it's still windy but colder, just put a jacket over top of the Windbreaker. Like the Windbreaker's still going to keep doing its job, but now you've got extra insulation, and you didn't have to take the extra step of shedding a layer to put on a layer and then put the layer back on over top of that. So
yeah, I think the Windbreaker gets categorized as a piece that would be an outer layer every time. And while that is most of the time how you end up using it, it is not a requirement. And Brigham especially tested this pretty extensively, where he would often layer things over the top of the Windbreaker rather than taking the Windbreaker off, putting on an insulation piece, and then putting the Windbreaker back over the top of that. He would just simply put an insulation piece over the top and then take it back off when we started moving again. And so he asked me to kind of do the same, and others in the office, and there's a noticeable warmth increase by just leaving that on. Yeah. And it's a really interesting way to use it, but it adds to that versatility, the massive range of time that you could use or have to keep this jacket on your body.
Yeah.
So, so as far as fit goes, I think that covers it. I would say, like, If you don't have a Nova Pro and you were to put this over the top of your other jacket, like you would notice it blocking so much of that wind that's still getting through all the stitching on a down jacket, you know. But again, for this particular piece, it's probably going to start to compress at least a little bit of the down in that piece. So just be kind of aware of that, even though that is a fantastic way to use the wind jacket or a wind jacket in general. Ours is really sized to be able to be kind of over the top of mid layers and base layers more so than all the way over the top of a full-on puffy. So
yeah.
Okay, so other aspects of this, we covered fit, covered sizing. This will be released in black and dark forest. Those are the two colors. Should be able to see some of those images up online at this point as well. Let's see here. We've got a few things. If you go to when this is online, which I guess at the time of this recording, it will be available for you guys to look at. You can go onto our website and you can see a rating system now where we will rank its breathability, durability, warmth, packability, things like that, wind resistance, water resistance. So you can go and see some charts to quickly judge some of those things right on the product page itself. But let's run through some features. So the jacket has a chest pocket, has a single chest pocket on your left side. You can stuff the piece into that chest pocket, but the chest pocket is actually quite large, so you can easily fit, whatever. I was going to say cell phone, but Brigham doesn't like the idea of a cell phone in there. So gloves, you can put gloves in there, and other trinkets like that. So it's quite large. I will pack it into that chest pocket sometimes still just to keep it confined, but the pocket is quite large, so it's really moldable and loose a little bit still in there. But I mean, this thing packs down to like the size of your fist. It really does.
It's just really packable in like a really adaptable way, meaning like you can just like stuff it into crevices almost if you want to just fill in some space.
Like it would fit in a hip belt pocket.
Into your pant pocket if you wanted, honestly. And it would just kind of take the shape of your pocket. So that's kind of also why like we didn't put like the double-sided zipper just so people could zip it up into the pocket, because you're almost losing adaptability by stuffing it into that pocket versus rolling it up into the hood or just rolling it up into a ball and stuffing it into a void or a crevice in your pack. Yeah,
there's no insulation, so it doesn't hurt it to be stuffed for long periods of time per se.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, just for reference, this piece can be compressed so tightly that you could get it into your hip belt pocket on a backpack. I mean, it's small.
Yeah.
So really adjustable. On the bottom of the piece, there is a draw cord adjustable hem. I love this aspect of it. People often underestimate the amount of heat loss that they're getting out the bottom of their jackets. And so we do have a single adjustment on this piece, and that is at the hem. So you can keep that tighter to the body, make sure that you're not just dumping all your heat straight out of the bottom of the jacket. So that is an adjustable hem. Very similar to that on the Ventus and Vario as far as placement and use. We've got, I'll let you describe this one, a close-fitting slick hood. So you've got slick in here. What does that mean?
Slick means there's no hardware or adjustment or any kind of apparatus anywhere on the hood. That's another like dialed-in design aspect of the hood, of the jacket itself is, it's a really lightweight, thin fabric, and so the isolated weight of, say, a cord lock or one adjustment piece of hardware, proportionally to that area of fabric, is very heavy. That creates pulling, that creates discomfort and opportunity for things to snag or catch. And frankly, if we can design the hood to fit well enough, then those adjustability features are just not needed for like the likelihood or the percentage of use that they will actually see. So
the more stiff a hood is, or the more insulation or materials used in the hood, the more that an adjustment piece is needed. So like if you're watching this on camera, if I was to put this altitude hood up, it's so light, it's so moldable that there's no need to have a draw cord on that. Like that wouldn't make sense to anyone to put a draw cord on a shirt fabric. And it's basically the same application for this. It's so light, it's so moldable that getting a very proper fit, and there's really no adjustments needed beyond that. So even
makes the jacket more comfortable. It's like, say you just wanted to sleep in it. You put the hood on, and now you don't have any adjustable hardware anywhere on your head that's going to be uncomfortable. It's especially for layering. Like if you were to, be wearing this with the hood on and then feel the need to put on a puffy that does have an adjustable hood, and now you're just stacking hardware on the back of your head and just
and if there is an adjustment in the piece, I would just say it's with how far up you zip the front of it. So if you want it to fit a little looser for some reason, just don't do the top 2 inches or so of the zipper. If you're maybe running into wind, maybe it's hitting you on like coming into your face or something like that, you could zip that all the way up underneath your chin, and it will kind of shrink up the size of the front of that, which I think we inherently do, but we never think about.
Yeah.
But if there is any adjustment that's needed, it's really been able to be taken care of just by the zipper.
And the opening is elastic. The face opening itself, it's elasticized, so it's not just a static hole. It's got stretch to it. And then, like you said, if you need more room, unzip it a little bit. But it is close fitting in the way that we want people to be able to turn their head and the hood move with the head instead of the head move within the hood.
Yep. Okay, other aspects. We have a YKK number 3 zipper on here. We have elastic thumb hole loops for layering.
Yep.
So you can pop those on, layer up, take them back off. The back of it does drop. Similar to all of our other apparel pieces, that's another aspect that, like, it's not a look thing. It is a look thing. It looks better, but it's a performance thing to have a drop back for sure. As you sit down, as you're moving and whatnot, keeping a lower back on there, it adds warmth. It really does. Keeps those cold gusts from just sneaking up your back. So, okay. What else have we not covered? So we did cover just the aspect of layering over the top of it, which I think is a pretty unique factor. Let's maybe talk about just some different use cases that we've had this in, or any other aspects that you want to, if it's not just use cases or something that just makes this different, that made, maybe stories that made you realize, like, man, this piece is ready. Like it's performing at such a high level. I'm very happy with this piece. Anything like that. Let's maybe move the conversation into that. So
one thing I'll probably point out just before we kind of transition to this is one other actual, I would say, utility of this piece is bug protection. It actually, I've kind of deliberately used it kind of with that in mind on multiple backpacking trips where, summertime, plenty warm, even if it wasn't windy at all. I was using this instead of spraying myself down with bug spray, and it's actually quite effective. So it's just something to keep in mind. I try to avoid using bug spray as much as possible. I just don't like the oiliness of it, but it is, the wind jacket, the windbreaker, it doesn't run out, right? You can keep spraying yourself, and eventually you'll run out of bug spray. So that is one other just useful application is, it's got a hood, it's long sleeves, and it is tightly woven. So I'm not going to say it's going to prevent any and all bug bites, but I have found it to be quite useful in like just typical Rocky Mountain mosquito, exposure. It's quite useful. So
yeah, I'm just thinking,
with that being said,
I'm thinking in my head about a time I was out in Colorado this last year where we were getting swarmed by flies at an insane, and they'd bite you, right? And so they could bite you through this altitude hoodie, but the windbreaker would have been perfect for that scenario.
Right.
Okay, so let's maybe just turn this. So one of the things that we stress a lot was versatility. Because again, a lot of times you think of a windbreaker to block wind. That's it. I think we've touched on it a few times of like, oh, you could use it some of these other aspects, but let's revisit that. You've said that multiple times in internal messaging and testing and conversations around the office. So what makes this so highly versatile and a year-round piece?
Yeah. That's one of the things as we use this more and more. Just started like just identifying this concept that for how much this windbreaker weighs, for what this piece is, we started realizing how much use we get out of it in all seasons and all conditions for that amount of weight. So it has this interesting ratio of the amount of usability throughout the year for how much it weighs compared to like almost every other clothing piece that we have. So aside from, let's say, maybe pants and like the altitude hoodie, like you're going to be generally, for example, I'll use an altitude hoodie as a base layer in the winter and then almost a standalone top all the rest of the year long. So I probably get the most use out of an altitude hoodie, and it weighs about 4 ounces. If I'm using shorts, I'm not using shorts in the wintertime. If I'm using pants, there's summertime conditions where I'm not using pants. Right. Rain jacket, hardly ever use a rain jacket. Puffy jacket, I put those on at night, right? Any mid layer, like the Ventus, again, I'll put that on maybe if we're stopping for dinner on the trail or at night, maybe in the mornings, right? So that's just like a few isolated use cases throughout a day or throughout a season. But a windbreaker is something that has just this immediate benefit all season long that can be worn for extended periods of time. So it's just this really interesting use case ratio of...
It's like this piece that you didn't know you didn't have.
Yeah.
And then once you have it and you start to use it, you're like, holy cow, this thing is so useful. Like and like you say, year round. Because in the summer months, you get up and you start hiking. Let's say you're at high elevation, right? You're trying to escape the heat. You're going into the mountains. It's going to keep you warm when the wind's blowing in the mornings and you're starting to hike. Or heck, sometimes in the middle of the day, it can still be, you get up on top of a peak and all of a sudden It's like, dang, this is cold up here. The second I stop moving, I'm cold again.
Yeah, your back's sweaty because you did this 4,000-foot climb. You get to the top of a peak or a pass, and you want to stop and take some pictures, take it all in, have a snack. So you take your pack off. You get immediate rapid cooling on your back because it's soaked in sweat. And that's you're cooling off too fast. It might be 75 degrees, but because of that wind, like you're going to cool off too fast. The windbreaker goes on.
Yeah. In that case I was just talking about in Colorado with the bugs, like they were just out all day long, and the windbreaker wouldn't have been overheating me to wear that, on top of an altitude hoodie. So it would have been, useful there. And that's like all day long in the summer. And then you look at winter conditions and you could absolutely wear it all day long in winter conditions as well.
Yep.
And so it's really a piece that can be used in a massive amount of applications to stay very comfortable, warm. Now, let me ask this. Let me kind of be the devil's advocate here. Is a windbreaker a superficial comfort piece, or is it a critical piece? Meaning, for like, let's just say safety or something like that. Like, is this just like a plush piece? Like, oh man, it's 4 ounces, but it just keeps me so comfortable, so happy. Or is there like a reason to say like, no, this could be a critical piece in a backpacking kit?
I would say when it's used correctly, or when it's thoughtfully used for, like, let's say efficiency of like your the clothing system that you're going to take on a trip, I'd say it's a critical piece, because at some point, like, people have to reach their destination, which means you got to move. You have to move from point A to point B, or back to point A. Got to be able to move, and you have to be able to hydrate your body at the same time. You've got limited amount of food that you've packed. So in my mind, it may feel to the unfamiliar, people that haven't really put it to the test and used it and found the efficiency of it, may come across as like, okay, this is just like a luxury thing. You just always want to take off that little bit of chill. But it often means that you can pack less weight if you implement this piece with the rest of your clothing.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. But what I'm thinking of is this piece may not be the critical piece, if that makes sense, in a survival scenario. But what it is it keeps your other pieces' ability to be the critical piece. So what I'm thinking of, what I see countless times over and over and over again, I've made this mistake over and over again, is getting up and starting to hike or whatever. Like maybe it's not getting up in the morning, maybe it's in the afternoon, maybe it's just after a meal. And you start hiking with your lofted insulation layers on. And you start to sweat, you don't want to stop and take it off, and you're introducing this moisture into those lofted insulation pieces, right? And that becomes then full circle when we get to camp at night, or when maybe the weather really turns and suddenly they're putting those pieces back on and they're not performing at the level they need to, because guess what? It takes heat, it takes sunlight, it takes those things to get the moisture back out of a garment. And in some cases even, you might be in a scenario where you're not going to get your stuff dry, period, on this trip because of weather and conditions. Winter conditions make it so much harder, or a combination of conditions in summertime even can make that harder. And so what happens, and it's like the side effect of this is that then they are compromising these other materials, these other layers, that then comes back to bite them when they actually need those layers to perform, versus if they were using a windbreaker to begin with to stay the correct temperature to begin with, and then that lofted piece is in their pack staying very dry, being able to perform as needed when the time is needed. I think that's probably more of where I see this being like this critical piece, not just hey, this is really comfortable and it's 4 ounces.
Yeah.
So, okay. Any other comments just on versatility here of what people should be thinking about?
I think as we kind of describe how we've used it, where and when, I think that'll give a pretty good
I mean, you
idea.
made a comment here that I think is just kind of worth repeating, that you said it's the best benefit to weight ratio and the highest number of days used per year for how lightweight it is. And I think that really does just sum up, the amount of days you can spend in this year, the benefit to weight ratio of just being at 4 ounces. It all adds up to be a phenomenal piece. And I think that's exactly what the Nebo is. It's not just, hey, you guys need to use a windbreaker. It's the Nebo specifically enables that. It's not trapping moisture. It's allowing for that breathability. It's not overly slippery. It's not all these things that maybe if you have tried a windbreaker in the past and not enjoyed it, I think you would have a completely different experience with this. And again, that just really comes back to the fabrics we're able to use, the partners we're able to have, the stuff we're able to bring to market with our direct-to-consumer business model. I actually don't have, the price right in front of me right now. But from what I remember, this piece is going to come in at a super competitive price point, especially knowing what is going into this piece and the cost of what's going into this piece compared to other things that we priced out, other things that we tested. It's tremendous. And again, that just comes back to you guys supporting us to do what we love in a direct-to-consumer business model, be able to cut out that retail, put our focus on strictly performance and not trying to hit any kind of price point with things. But a lot of times we put 100% of our focus on performance, and the price lands where it lands. And oftentimes that price lands at still a very competitive rate, which is the case with this Nebo piece. So it's a phenomenal piece, wide range of versatility and use case with this piece. And it's the piece you didn't know you needed until today for probably a lot of you guys. Your wind jacket probably wasn't what you're searching and looking at reviews for, but I promise you it's a piece that you will greatly enjoy once you get your hands on it and add it into a layering system. So, Brigham, any last thoughts here?
No, I think just to add on to what you just said, it's I think the attention given to how it fits, the specific fabric that we used, will I think it'll kind of get people to. I don't want to say like make them want to use it, not necessarily, hey, I want to use a piece of clothing, but it'll eliminate a lot of maybe the hesitancy to use it. Just judging by, some of the other offerings that are out there and, how they feel, how they perform, how they fit. I could see that there could develop some reluctance to use that. Kind of like a rain jacket. A lot of times people they just don't even want to put the rain jacket on because they know how it's going to feel because they felt it before. So I think there will be some of that going on with people kind of putting it on and seeing the utility of it and feeling, experiencing how it feels once you put it on and put it to use.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw one last question at you, a little bit of a curveball. What was your favorite part of designing the Nebo Windbreaker? Most enjoyable part?
Definitely just the testing of getting, like, having those first experiences when we like kind of got the fit dialed in, had the fabric selected, and then was able to put it into a real world extended use. I honestly don't remember which the very first trip was, but some of the ones that come to mind were like, the Grand Canyon. That was
it's cold at the top, man.
Stinking windy. That was, we drove through like a haboob, like just to get to the Grand Canyon. It was crazy windy, and that was a very dynamic, condition. The conditions were very dynamic, and the physicality was very dynamic, and that was one that came to mind. That was like one of the noteworthy experiences in the design process with this jacket.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example of it for sure. Okay, we'll let you guys go check the Nebo Windbreaker out on our website. Again, that's outdoorvitals.com. It's a phenomenal piece. We typically release this podcast the same time that we release it on our website. So there may be a special or a discount or something like that going on. So you may want to jump over there sooner than later, but go check it out. It is a truly unique piece. And it does perform in the backcountry. So I think you guys will really enjoy this. Let us know, though, once you get the piece, make sure to come back and review it. Let others know what you think of it, to pass on that information and be valuable to others as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and close up this podcast. If you haven't rated or reviewed this podcast, please do so. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at the Live Ultralight Podcast at gmail.com. That will come over to one of us here to answer, or you can leave a comment on our YouTube channel. Again, our YouTube channel is Live Ultralight Podcast on youtube.com. So go check it out there. Other than that, hope you guys are finding time to get outside. It's kind of that time of year where everyone is feeling like the seasonality drag. I feel like around the office, everyone kind of walks outside and takes this big breath of fresh air, just feeling like it's time to get back outside. We've been inside a little bit too much. We do our best to get outside. I'm looking forward to getting out this weekend. I'm going to attempt to take my kids camping, but it's going to be snowing for like the next 2-3 days. So just happened to line up perfectly where we're going to have the worst weather of the winter for me to go take two little ones out camping. So, but yeah, try to get outside. It's well worth it. Do it for your health, for your mental health. I promise you'll see some differences. I definitely do, at least, and a lot of others around the office comment on that. So thanks for joining us. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you guys on a future episode.